All right, good morning, everyone. Hope you guys are doing great today. Today's class video is for Tuesday, March 31st, 2020. I have two purposes for the video today. First, I'm going to walk you through the first two takeaways from the Creation and Evolution podcast that you guys listened to for last week. Again, good job to all of you who contributed to the discussion board from last week, kind of on this podcast, getting your reaction and commenting on some other people's. I saw some really good discussion posts on the board. The second purpose of this video, I'm going to give you guys an overview for the homework assignment, which is due. Again, due dates are 4 p.m. of the next day. So the assignment today is due tomorrow at 4 p.m. I'm going to give you guys a little bit of an overview of what I'm looking for as far as that. But first, Father Nepple's podcast, Catholic Stuff You Should Know. It's a great podcast. I really, if you're ever looking to start a new podcast, they delve into some really interesting topics. So endorse going back and listening to that in the future if you'd like. But the reason why I had you guys listen to this podcast is obviously we're looking at this question of, okay, what does science say about evolution? And can we harmonize that with the church teaching on creation, Adam and Eve, the foundations of human life and human existence? So the first two things I want to talk about today is first going back to this point, which we talked about at the start of the semester, is that faith and reason go hand in hand. So we can believe that because God is the creator and the author of all things, whatever we discover through science to be true should be in harmony with the truths that God reveals about himself in Revelation. Okay, we're going to talk about a little bit, review why that is. And then secondly, we're going to talk about how Genesis distinguishes between God fashioning and God creating, and how that is useful for explaining the three things that are scientifically unexplainable still. Okay, so the first, Catholicism and science. Why should we think a harmony can exist? Again, this is a little bit of a review of a point that I tried to demonstrate earlier in the year, is that if God is the creator and the source of all truth, okay, supernatural truth and natural truth, they should be in harmony. Why? Because both come from God. Right? And God can't contradict himself. So let's say God creates the universe a certain way, and science tries to experiment and discover and find out certain things about that universe, such as where human life came from, how did it develop, all of the truths of math, physics, biology, chemistry. Those are here on the right side, natural truths. We use science and reason to try to discover those things and learn about them through the scientific method, etc., in order to be able to come to know the world better. So that's great. That should be in harmony with what God discloses and reveals about himself. The supernatural truths that God reveals through theology or through divine revelation, through which we study using theology, and we come to believe those things through our faith. Those two things should be in harmony. Why? Because God cannot contradict himself. Okay, because it's important to understand that if God reveals something over here that appears to be in conflict, a conclusion from over here that appears to be in conflict with something that science teaches, we need to try to discover the harmony that exists between the two. Because again, ultimately, everything comes from God. Everything true comes from God. So there should be a dialogue that takes place between what the faith teaches and what science discovers. Let's take an example, and this is kind of the evolution example. So say God reveals and teaches us through the faith, through the Bible, through Genesis chapter 1, that God created everything. Okay, Genesis 1, it's the story of the first creation narrative. God created all things. All things came to be through him. That's what the faith teaches. But on the right side, we have science discovering, with Darwin, with modern genetic theory in the last 50 or so years, that evolutionary theory, which is basically a change in inherent traits of organisms over time. So basically, the genetic code of certain organisms is slowly changing over time to produce different variations in species. That's been proven true. Okay, so it's microevolutionary theory, which is basically small little changes in species over time, is pretty well accepted almost as fact in the scientific community at this point. So we appear to have a conflict. Why? Because it seems on the left side we have God creating everything, and on the right side we have organisms kind of creating themselves. And whenever we have a conflict, we have three options. We can toss out this side over here, or we can toss out this side over here, or our third option is to try to find a way in which both can work together. Now, obviously, modern culture and society says that, well, either you have to toss out what the faith says and become a scientist, or you have to become superstitious and disregard scientific findings about evolution and cling to the faith in kind of an irrational and superstitious way. Well, the beauty of the church, again, going back to this truth that, God is the source of all truths that we discover, the ones that he reveals about himself, in which we apprehend through faith, and all of the truths of science, which we discover and use through our reason, through our experimental capabilities. Those two are in harmony. And so the purpose is to harmonize both, since, again, God is the source of all truth. One truth can't contradict another truth. So the goal of kind of modern theology and the dialogue between faith and science, again, is to find how science can inform our faith, and how faith can lead us to a deeper apprehension of the why behind science. Okay, so science teaches, a certain thing like evolutionary theory. Things change. Well, faith can inform it by bringing us back to the why, bringing us back to the creator of all things. Okay, now second point of this video. There are three questions that science has struggled to answer through the years. The most important question, I think the question of all questions, is a philosophical one. How did something come from nothing? This goes back to the start of the semester where we talked about the existence of God. How does something exist if it came from nothing in the first place? How did living things come from non-living things? So if you really think about it deeply, it's like, how can something go from not living at all, like a rock, to a microorganism, a piece of bacteria, something that's living, something that's multiplying, something that's breathing, has life, can reproduce? How did living things come to live in the first place? And then last, and most important for the question of evolution, how did man, who's we can think, we can make decisions, we're aware of ourselves, we possess a certain self-awareness of who we are. How did they come from? How did we as humans come from the beasts, from animals, from from wild, appetite-driven, seemingly irrational creatures? Okay, so one thing that Genesis 1 is really cool, and this is from the podcast that I liked, is that Genesis 1 shed some light on these three kind of scientific jumps that science struggles to answer. And it's the three moments in Genesis 1 where the word barach is used. Okay, so barach means to create from nothing. Okay, so it's not like creating from something that already exists. It's God's direct intervention in the universe. So it's where God basically creates out of nothing, creates something out of nothing. So in chapter 1, verse 1, it says, "In the beginning God created the heavens and the earth." Okay, this is where the word God created the heavens and the earth. The word created, again, is barach, meaning creates from nothing the heavens and the earth. So that answers that question. How does something come from nothing? The second question, again, that science struggles to answer is, how did living things come from non-living things? Okay, that's a mystery there. How does something go from an inanimate object like a pen or a rock or a piece of, a handful of dirt to something that's alive? Okay. In chapter 1, verse 21, we hear that God created the great sea monsters and every living creature that moves, in which the waters swarm according to their kinds. So again, Genesis 1:21 says, look, God intervenes at this moment in the development of the earth and creates living things. Okay. From non-living things, living things come about through God's creating from nothing living creatures. And then third, and most importantly, how did man, again, who's this, we can think, we have free will, come from animals? That's a huge jump. There's a huge difference between man and animal. There are a lot of similarities, but there's also a huge difference between man and animals, because we can think, we've created a society, we have arts, we have language, we have basically we're the highest creature in creation. Well, this is the point in Genesis chapter 1 where it says, "Let us make man our own image after our likeness." So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. So can we see that word barach one more time, where Genesis gives an account of God directly intervening and creating humanity. Okay, and what's unique about us is that we have human souls. Again, the difference between a human soul and an animal soul is that we have all of the, we can still reproduce, we can still hunt, we can still do all the things the animals do. But this time we have higher faculties, meaning we can think, we can make free choice. And from that, humanity has developed in a much further and more sophisticated way. Okay, to demonstrate that point, and this is the last thing, this is kind of a timeline of the universe. So I'm going to walk through this and basically show God fashioning the universe and God directly intervening in the creation of the universe. Okay, so the whole purpose of this timeline is basically to demonstrate kind of a walkthrough of my, not so much my theory, but kind of a theory that's prevailing out there about how the universe was formed, how the world was formed, how we humans came to be in accord with evolution, but also with God being involved and directly intervening in the three significant moments that I just mentioned right here. So we have the Big Bang 13.6 billion years ago. Before that, we have, again, the answer to why something came from nothing. God's direct intervention, integrating right before the Big Bang, his creative power to, create the universe ex nihilo. From nothing, something comes to be. That's a miracle. We have the Big Bang. Then we have, 13.6 billion years old. A ton of time passes by, obviously, 11 billion years for the formation of the Earth, which is around 4.6 billion years old. And then a little bit further along the timeline, again, this is not a scientific timeline whatsoever, we have, again, living things coming from non-living things. That's a miracle. If you really try to wrap your mind out of how something can go from being not alive to alive, that's definitely a mystery to try to wrap your mind around. So we have God's direct intervention of creating living things, animals, plants, etc., microorganisms, bacteria, from non-living things. Then we have the development of those living things, leading us all the way to Africa, or somewhere around 1.8 million years ago, so much, much further along the timeline. We have these kind of, they're called hominids, or you might know them as Neanderthals, basically human-like creatures who are walking around. There's scientific evidence that somewhere around, again, roughly 2 million years ago, there were human-like creatures who were walking around just like you and I, look similar to us, developing all the way into, again, the evolution behind this, the development of these creatures into basically what we call an anatomically modern human being. So people who look just like you and I in every sort of way, but on an anatomical level, meaning they look like us, have the same features, arms, legs, can run, but are short of being human. Why? Because they don't have the same behavioral qualities as modern human beings. So there's a development of creation there, leading us all the way up to what science calls a great leap forward here around 60,000 BC. So if you look again at this timeline, somewhere around 60,000 BC, there was this thing that happened, again, that science is trying to explain and it can't really wrap its mind around, where there's this unexplained movement of anatomically modern human beings who are basically, again, Neanderthals who don't know how to communicate, don't know, are basically highly sophisticated apes who don't really know anything and don't really seem to have free choice. There's nothing that separates them from the animals, to a great leap forward of language, art, development of culture. There's religion, there's art, there's cave art, there's conceptual thinking, there's relationships, there's early societies, there's collaboration between one man and another man. Well, somewhere around 60,000 BC, this occurred just before these sort of animals left Africa. And so my theory, and again, this is kind of, again, take this with a grain of salt, this is the point where God directly intervened and created the first two human beings whom we refer to as Adam and Eve. Again, not creating them out of nothing. Again, there's the development of creation that occurs all the way through here, leading us up to this point where God puts the rational human soul into the existent anatomically modern human being to create human culture or human life, human existence. What makes us Homo sapien? What makes us different from the animals? Well, again, being able to think, being able to choose, looking similar to anatomically modern human beings, but behavioral qualities and characteristics is different here. Okay, so the significance of that is to kind of show these three moments of God directly intervening, as Genesis 1 demonstrates, kind of on the timeline of the universe. And this is kind of the harmony between evolution and the theology of creation. Again, God creating the universe on the left side, God creating living things, and then God creating man. Okay. So for the sake of time, that's all I have for today. Tomorrow, your assignment is here posted in Classroom. And basically, you're going to walk through and read about, kind of explore the very broad church teaching on evolution. So there's an article for you guys to read and 9 questions to answer. Basically, you're going to read through this article, explore a little bit of the Catholic position on evolution. There's some different, a couple of significant moments in the last 100 years from Pope Pius XII and then John Paul II. And basically that's to get you guys a little bit more familiar with what the church actually teaches about evolution. It's a very broad teaching. There's not a lot of, there's a lot of openness to what evolution has discovered. So complete that, and then afterward, you're going to have to do a little work on the 12th screw tape letter. Again, you read that for yesterday. You're going to read this article. Pull it up here. It's all about the sin of sloth. So again, when most of us think of sloth, we think of like an animal, or we think of the actual African or South American animal that's lazy and hangs around, or we might just think lazy in general. There's a lot more to sloth than initially meets the eye. So read through the article and learn about what sloth is. Read all the way down through here. So stop here. And you're going to go back through, and basically what I want you to do for the second part of the assignment is you're going to pick out a quote from the 12th screw tape letter, and using kind of what the insights from this article, I want you guys to connect your quote with the article, meaning explain how you see the vice of sloth within the words that screw tape is telling Wormwood, how he's instructing Wormwood to use this capital sin of sloth to undermine the patient. And again, that's the first part. Second part, revisit the final paragraph of letter 12. I think this is kind of like the summary portion of letter 12. And based on your understanding of, again, you have to read the article. Based on your understanding of sloth, explain in 2 to 3 sentences why the safest road to hell is the gradual one. Again, access to the letters is online on my bulletin board. To access the letters online, or if you have the book, that's totally fine in hard copy. This is due tomorrow at 4 p.m. and that's all I have for you guys today. Good luck.